Tremaine, I want to come to you because when we think about studying what happened, when we think about studying history, it takes us to this conversation about race and education. You were one of the people who contributed. You were a contributing writer, wrote an essay for the 1619 Project and for the book. Talk a little bit about sort of this era that we're living in. I wanted to also bring to your attention something that a New York Times writer wrote. He wrote, every episode of Racial Progress has generated a backlash like the one we're living through today. Talk about that concept of America always having a backlash to progress and how that connects with the 1619 Project and your work.
Well, certainly, Yamish, this backlash has often been a violent one, right, with actual bloodshed. We think about what drew the end of Reconstruction and the decades and decades of actual violence being heaped upon the backs of Black folks and the Black blood that was spilled in this country. But this new debate and this new fight over critical race theory, which again we have to say repeatedly, is not actually being taught in these schools, right? But it's about maintaining a sense of whiteness and not to be redundant with the idea of fragility, but this idea that there needs to be a patriotic education to make sure that we are cocooning white children from the realities of this America in which we lived. But also, this moment we're living in now is not new, right? We've been reckoning with this idea of this backlash from the very beginning, especially when it comes over the politics of memory. Who are the gatekeepers of memory and history? We think about after the Civil War, the Daughters of the Confederacy started taking over school boards to make sure they had control of the books, to make sure they can molest and shape how slavery was viewed, how the South was viewed, so that the Civil War became the war of Northern aggression, not the Civil War over the rights of people to own and sell other people and do so on slave labor camps that we now have a genteel phrase, they're plantations now, right? So this is nothing new, but it also speaks to how uneducated and miseducated Americans are around our true history. Not to again be redundant with this idea of mythology, but we think about the stories we tell, race and mythology about this kind of exceptionalism, but from the very beginning was spoiled and tainted at best.
Yeah, I mean that mythology, that sort of reckoning that we're dealing with history is absolutely at the center of this. Tim, what do you see when you talk to people, when you're talking to conservative voters, or you're talking to people in Michigan, maybe liberals as well? When you talk about sort of this history that we're dealing with, this the critical race theory arguments, the falsehoods that are being told there, what's your reporting tell you about this debate?
Well, I think, Yamish, the most important thing we have to recognize is that this country is now very much, you described the fault lines that divide us. I think one of the biggest fault lines, and one that's maybe a little harder to get our arms around, is just the informational fault lines. We don't have disagreements with one another based on any common baseline of information anymore. Whether it's critical race theory, whether it's the assault on the Capitol in January, whether it's Barack Obama being born in Kenya, there are sources of information that are now readily available to anyone that will confirm their pre-existing notions or worldview, depending on what the subject matter or the debate of the day is. And so I think you can draw a straight line in many senses from what Trymaine was just describing with the historical analog of the post-Civil War period and the Reconstruction period to today, where you knew in the hours after the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, you knew that that history was going to be rewritten in real time, and that it wasn't going to be long before people who were in that building that day taking cover, putting gas masks over their faces, fleeing for their lives into a bunker that was secured by Capitol Police. Those very people would, within days, if not maybe weeks, begin reshaping and recrafting the story of what actually took place that day to suit their own political ends. And so it's not a new routine that we're seeing here. I think perhaps what is new is the degree to which that misinformation and those outright lies can be easily disseminated straight into the veins of the American public.